let me take you into the flow of this moment, because there comes a time when silence is no longer safe. For too long, there were things that sat heavy in the corners of the heart, words swallowed because we thought no one would understand, truths buried deep because we believed the world wasn't ready to hear them. But I came to tell you today, the silence has broken. The hush that once covered the room has cracked open, and the sound of courage is rising. They are no longer hiding. There was a season when shrinking seemed easier than standing, when keeping your head down felt safer than lifting it up, when masking pain seemed more acceptable than admitting it out loud. But let me tell you something, silence is a prison. You think you're keeping yourself safe, but really you're suffocating. You think you're avoiding judgment, but really you're avoiding freedom. Silence makes you smaller than God ever created you to be, and it convinces you that hiding is protection, when in reality, hiding is destruction. There comes a moment when God shakes the very walls of what you tried to keep secret. The truth rattles against the cage you built, and suddenly the whispers won't stay contained. Suddenly, what you once tiptoed around demands to be spoken. It's not weakness that breaks the silence, it's strength. It's not fear that opens the mouth, it's faith. Because when you realize that what you've been through wasn't meant to shame you, but to shape you, you start talking differently. You start walking differently. You start showing up differently. Some of you know what it feels like to sit in silence with your own tears, to cry at night and wipe your face before the morning comes because you didn't want anyone to see. You know what it feels like to wrestle with questions that never seem safe to ask. But let me tell you this, God does his best work in broken places. He takes silence and turns it into a song. He takes what was hidden and reveals his glory through it. And once you understand that, once you feel his power stirring inside of you, you can't stay quiet anymore. The silence is broken, and I need you to catch this. The breaking is not just about your voice, it's about your destiny. Because what you've been hiding is connected to who you are called to be. The enemy loves silence because silence keeps you stuck. But God loves sound because sound shakes atmospheres. Sound breaks chains. Sound lets the world know that you are alive, and not just alive, but living with purpose. You may have been hiding because you thought the world wasn't ready for your truth. But the truth is, you weren't ready to see just how powerful your truth really is. When silence breaks, fear loses its grip, shame loses its hold, lies lose their authority. That's why the enemy tried to convince you to stay quiet, because he knew that once you started speaking, healing would start spreading. Once you started testifying, chains would start falling. Once you opened your mouth, the very atmosphere would have to shift. So don't apologize for breaking your silence. Don't apologize for stepping out of the shadows. Don't apologize for letting your voice rise after years of holding it back, because your voice carries the sound of survival, the sound of resilience, the sound of someone who has walked through the fire and didn't burn. Your silence may have kept you safe for a season, but this season demands your sound. This season demands that you be bold enough to say, I won't hide anymore. They are no longer hiding, and neither are you. There is something powerful about unveiling, something sacred that happens when what was once covered begins to come into the light. For so long, we've been conditioned to put on masks, to smile when our hearts are heavy, to act strong when our knees are buckling. We learn early how to dress pain in laughter, how to decorate brokenness with makeup, how to keep secrets dressed in silence. But the truth is, nothing grows in the dark. Healing doesn't happen in hiding. Freedom doesn't live in pretense. The power of unveiling is realizing that the very thing you tried so hard to conceal is the very thing God wants to use to reveal his glory. We wear masks because we're afraid of judgment. We cover wounds because we don't want pity. We hide flaws because we fear rejection. But here's the thing, when you cover what hurts, you also cover what heals. When you cover the wound, the light cannot reach it. And if the light doesn't reach it, infection sets in. That's why unveiling isn't just about honesty, it's about survival. It's about letting the light in so the healing can begin. The world tells us strength is found in how well we can pretend, but heaven whispers that true strength is in our vulnerability. That's why unveiling is so uncomfortable. It feels like weakness. It feels like exposure. It feels like the very thing you were running from. But vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is warfare. Every time you choose to take off a mask, every time you choose to reveal instead of conceal, you are declaring war against shame. Shame thrives in secrecy, but it dies in exposure. And the moment you unveil, shame starts to lose its power. Some of you know what it feels like to smile for the room while crying in the car, to give encouragement to everyone else while doubting yourself when you're alone, to show up for people even while you're secretly running on empty. That's the exhausting weight of hiding. You can't keep covering forever without breaking under the disguise. But the moment you unveil, you create space for God to carry what you were never meant to hold by yourself. The unveiling isn't just for you, it's for everyone connected to you. Because when you decide to be real, you give someone else permission to be real too. When you tell your story without polishing out the pain, someone else hears their reflection in your words and realizes they're not alone. Do you know how many people are waiting for your unveiling? Waiting for you to be bold enough to say, yes, I struggled, but I survived. Waiting for you to show them that perfection was never required for purpose. We spend so much time trying to impress people who are secretly broken too. You think they want your perfection, but what they really need is your authenticity. They don't need to see someone who never wrestled. They need to see someone who wrestled and won. They don't need to see someone who never bled. They need to see someone who bled but healed. That's the power of unveiling. Your scars speak louder than your silence ever could. Let me tell you something. Unveiling doesn't make you smaller. It makes you stronger. It doesn't reduce your influence. It expands it. Because people don't connect with your mask. They connect with your truth. They connect with the parts of you that are raw, unedited, and real. And when you finally unveil, you stop chasing approval and start standing in authenticity. That's when you realize you don't have to perform to be loved. You just have to be. So tonight, I dare you to unveil. I dare you to take off the mask, even if your voice trembles. I dare you to uncover the wound, even if the scar is still tender. I dare you to believe that the power of God can meet you in your honesty in a way he never could in your performance. Because unveiling is not exposure for shame, it's exposure for healing. It's not about showing off brokenness, it's about showing off restoration. The power of unveiling is this. What you thought disqualified you is actually what qualifies you. What you thought made you unworthy is the very thing God will use to make you unstoppable. You don't have to keep hiding behind strength that isn't real. You don't have to keep pretending that you don't feel what you feel. You don't have to keep silencing your story to make others comfortable. The mask has no power here. The wound has no shame here. The truth has a place here. They are no longer hiding, and the unveiling has begun. Fear has a way of building walls around us, doesn't it? It whispers to us that we are safer if we stay still, if we keep quiet, if we never dare to stretch beyond the boundaries that life has drawn. Fear is clever like that. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it settles into your mind with a gentle voice that sounds like protection, but feels like paralysis. And before you know it, you're living smaller than you were created to live, shrinking dreams, shrinking hope, shrinking faith. But when faith rises, fear loses its grip. That's why they are no longer hiding, because faith has replaced fear. Faith doesn't always show up in the roar of confidence. Sometimes faith shows up in trembling hands that still reach forward. Sometimes faith is a shaky voice that still chooses to speak. Faith doesn't erase fear immediately, but it outlasts it. Fear will shout, but faith whispers steady. Fear threatens, but faith assures. And when faith becomes the louder voice in your spirit, you find yourself stepping out of the shadows you thought you'd never escape. There was a time when fear seemed like the final authority. Fear told you to sit down, so you sat. Fear told you not to try, so you didn't. Fear told you that if you failed, the shame would crush you, so you never even attempted. But then something happened. Faith began to rise. Maybe it was a moment where you remembered a promise spoken over your life. Maybe it was a whisper from God reminding you that you are not forgotten. Maybe it was the quiet strength of realizing that if He brought you this far, He won't leave you now. However it came, faith showed up and started moving fear out of the way. That's the shift when you stop letting fear dictate your decisions and you start letting faith direct your steps. Faith doesn't need perfect circumstances. Faith just needs a willing heart. Faith says, I may not know how this will work out, but I know who holds it. Faith says, I may not feel ready, but I'm still moving. Faith says, I'm not hiding anymore because God didn't give me this gift, this calling, this fire, just for me to bury it in the ground. The truth is, fear and faith can occupy the same space, but they cannot rule the same heart. One will always lead, and whichever one you feed will grow stronger. If you feed fear with doubt and silence, it will keep you trapped. But if you feed faith with prayer, with hope, with action, faith begins to grow strong enough to walk you out of hiding. That's why some people around you can't understand how you're still standing. They don't know about the faith that's been carrying you. They don't know about the prayers that built a bridge for you when fear was trying to build a prison. Faith over fear is not just a statement. It's a lifestyle. It's waking up and deciding that fear will not be the author of your story. It's choosing to walk when fear says stand still. It's speaking when fear says stay silent. It's showing up even when your legs are shaking. It's knowing that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move through it. And once faith takes the lead, hiding is no longer an option because faith demands visibility. Faith says, let your light shine. Faith says, step into the room even if they don't expect you. Faith says, open your mouth and speak even if your voice quivers. And the more you exercise that faith, the more you realize that fear was never as powerful as it made itself seem. Fear was only as strong as your agreement with it. Once you broke that agreement, once you chose faith, fear lost its power. I don't know who needs this tonight, but the very thing fear told you would destroy you is the very thing faith is about to use to build you. The very door fear said you could never walk through is the door faith is unlocking right now. The very voice fear told you to silence is the voice faith is amplifying. Fear wanted to keep you hidden, but faith is pulling you into the light. They are no longer hiding because faith has risen higher than fear. For so long, identity was shaped by what other people said, by the labels they placed, by the mistakes that were never forgotten, and the expectations that were never met. When you live long enough under the weight of other people's words, you start to believe that their definition of you must be the truth. You start to think you are nothing more than your failure, nothing more than your heartbreak, nothing more than the broken chapters you try so hard to hide. But identity is not borrowed from voices that don't understand your purpose. Identity is reclaimed when you begin to see yourself through the eyes of the one who created you. That's why they are no longer hiding, because they are no longer bound by the world's definition of who they are. It takes courage to peel away the layers of false identity. It takes courage to say, I am not who they said I was, because people will get comfortable putting you in boxes. And if you're not careful, you'll shrink yourself to fit inside. They will say you're too much, so you start becoming less. They will say you'll never make it, so you stop trying. They will call you broken, so you stop believing you can be whole. But at some point, the truth has to rise in you, and you realize the label never matched the calling. The box never fit the destiny, and their words never had the authority to define your life. The enemy loves confusion because confusion clouds identity. If you don't know who you are, you'll settle for anything. If you don't know what you carry, you'll give it away too easily. If you don't know your worth, you'll accept less than what you deserve. But the moment you reclaim your identity, the moment you take it back from lies, fear, And insecurity, something shifts. You stop settling. You stop shrinking. You stop apologizing for existing. You stand up not as who they said you were, but as who God says you are, chosen, anointed, worthy, and unstoppable. Some of you have been living under borrowed names. You've been living under titles that don't belong to you. You've been living under words spoken over you in anger or in carelessness or out of ignorance. But tonight is about reclaiming. Tonight is about saying, that is not my name. That is not my story. That is not who I am. Because when you reclaim your identity, you reclaim your power. And when you reclaim your power, you refuse to hide. Think about it. Hiding was never about fear alone. It was about identity. You hid because you thought you weren't enough. You hid because you believed you were too broken. You hid because you thought you didn't have what it takes. But now you know better. Now you see clearer. Now you understand that even in your flaws, even in your cracks, there is still glory resting on your life. Identity reclaimed means you don't have to have it all together to walk in purpose. It means you don't have to be perfect to be powerful. It means you don't have to perform to be accepted. When you reclaim who you are, you also reclaim your authority. Authority to walk into rooms you once thought were too big for you. Authority to speak in places you once thought were too high for you. Authority to take up space in a world that tried to convince you to shrink. And authority to silence the lies that once had you bound. Because when you know who you are, you stop arguing with voices that never mattered. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never meant to understand. You stop fighting for a seat at tables that were never built for you because you realize you carry your own. That's what reclaiming looks like. It's not arrogance. It's awareness. Awareness that you are not ordinary, that you are not forgotten, that you are not disqualified. Awareness that every scar is proof of survival, not a mark of shame. Awareness that every no you endured, every door that shut, every season of hiding was preparing you to finally step into who you truly are. And when identity is reclaimed, you don't just walk differently. You see differently. You see opportunity where you once saw obstacles. You see strength where you once saw weakness. You see destiny where you once saw defeat. And because of that, you cannot go back into hiding. Once you've tasted the truth of who you are, you can never again be satisfied with the lies of who they said you were. They are no longer hiding because they have reclaimed their true identity. There's a certain kind of strength that comes from fighting battles no one ever knew you were in. The kind of storms you faced in silence. The nights you cried when no one was watching. The questions you carried deep inside your soul while still showing up for the world with a smile on your face. Those battles, the ones that happened in secret, were never wasted. They were preparing you for a victory that would not remain hidden. What you endured privately is the very thing that is now becoming your testimony publicly. That's why they are no longer hiding, because what was once a hidden battle is now a visible victory. We don't like to admit it, but some of the greatest wars are fought in the quiet. The war in your mind when doubt is louder than truth. The war in your spirit when fear tries to smother faith. The war in your heart when disappointment tries to kill your hope. And while nobody else could see the fight, you know the weight of it. You know how hard it was just to wake up, just to keep going, just to keep believing when nothing seemed to be changing. But those battles built you. They made you resilient. They gave you a strength that people now admire without even realizing what it cost you to carry it. The beauty of hidden battles is that God sees them all. He saw the nights you felt invisible. He saw the tears that stained your pillow. He saw the moments you almost gave up, but still held on to a shred of hope. And every time you chose to keep going, every time you chose to get back up, every time you chose to keep believing, He was shaping something in you that could only be revealed in victory. That's why your story is so powerful now, because you didn't just survive the storm, you grew in it. There's something about scars that tell the truth of battles fought in silence. They're not always visible on your skin, but they are imprinted in your soul. And yet, those scars are not shame, they are proof. Proof that you fought and didn't quit. Proof that you stumbled but didn't stay down. Proof that the enemy tried to break you, but God rebuilt you stronger. Now, what once made you feel weak is the very thing that makes you powerful. When people look at you now, they see the light, they see the strength, they see the victory, but they may never know the depths of the darkness you had to climb through to get here. They may never understand the weight of the silence you carried, and that's okay, because your life speaks louder than explanations ever could. Your victory doesn't need an introduction. It introduces itself. It shows up in your resilience, in your joy, in your confidence, in your refusal to hide anymore. And here's the thing, victory is never just about you. The moment you step into it, the moment you open your mouth and share what God brought you through, your victory becomes someone else's hope. Your survival becomes someone else's strength. The very testimony that was born from your hidden battle becomes the lifeline for someone still fighting in silence. That's why you can't hide anymore. Because your victory was never meant to stay private. It was meant to be a beacon for others. So many people are looking for a perfect story, but the truth is, it's the messy stories that set people free. It's the ones with the nights of doubt, the seasons of fear, the moments of breaking. It's the raw, unpolished, I didn't think I was going to make it stories that carry the most power. Because when you stand in victory after walking through that kind of valley, no one can deny that something greater was holding you up. This is what makes your testimony so dangerous to the enemy. He tried to bury you in shame. He tried to drown you in fear. He tried to silence you with pain. But here you are standing, speaking, living proof that the hidden battle didn't defeat you. That's why the enemy wanted you to stay silent. Because he knew your testimony would shake chains loose for somebody else. He knew your story would give someone the courage to keep fighting. He knew that once you revealed your victory, hiding would no longer be an option. They are no longer hiding because their hidden battles have turned into undeniable victories. There comes a moment when courage is no longer a suggestion, it's a requirement. A moment when hiding is no longer an option because the weight of your calling is too heavy to keep buried. You can feel it pressing against your chest, tugging at your spirit, whispering in the quiet that you were made for more than shadows. That's what happens when boldness starts calling your name. It won't let you shrink anymore. It won't let you apologize for existing anymore. It won't let you silence the very voice that was meant to set someone else free. That's why they are no longer hiding, because boldness has become their mandate. Boldness isn't arrogance. Boldness isn't about walking in rooms to prove a point. Boldness is about knowing that your presence carries purpose. Boldness is about understanding that when you show up fully as yourself, chains begin to fall. Atmospheres begin to shift and lives begin to change. Boldness doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means you decided that fear will not keep you silent. And the truth is, the world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more boldness. So many of us have been taught to dim our light because shining made other people uncomfortable. We've been taught to silence our voice because speaking truth rattled the wrong cages. We've been told to play small, to wait our turn, to sit quietly until someone else decided we were worthy. But boldness breaks those rules. Boldness says, I don't need permission to be who God called me to be. Boldness says, I don't need approval to walk in the authority that's already mine. Boldness says, I will not apologize for the space I was created to fill. Some of you know what it feels like to have your boldness criticized, to be called too much, too loud, too confident, just because you refuse to shrink. But let me tell you something. Boldness is supposed to disturb the places where silence once lived. Boldness is supposed to rattle the cages of fear and insecurity. Boldness is supposed to shake the rooms that were comfortable with your silence. You were never created to fit in. You were created to stand out. And boldness is the key that unlocks that truth. And here's the beauty of it. Boldness is contagious. When you step out, you give permission for someone else to step out too. When you speak up, someone else finds their voice. When you shine, someone else realizes they don't have to hide their light either. That's why your boldness matters. It's not just for you. It's for every person watching, wondering if they could ever do the same. Your courage becomes their confirmation. Your boldness becomes their blueprint. The enemy wants you to believe that playing small is safer. But the truth is, hiding has always been the riskier choice. Because when you hide, the gifts inside of you go unused. The purpose inside of you goes unfulfilled. The people connected to your voice go unreached. That's why this call to boldness is so urgent. It's not about ego. It's about assignment. And if you stay hidden, someone else's breakthrough stays hidden too. Boldness doesn't come from you. It comes from God within you. That's why you can step into rooms you never thought you belonged in. That's why you can speak with authority even when your voice trembles. That's why you can walk into places that once intimidated you and now carry yourself like you were always meant to be there. Boldness is the evidence that you trust the one who sent you. Boldness is the proof that you've decided hiding no longer serves the destiny on your life. So this is the call. Stop waiting for perfect timing. Stop waiting for everyone to agree. Stop waiting for the fear to vanish. Move now. Speak now, shine now, step out now, because the time for hiding has ended and the time for boldness has begun. You were created for such a time as this, not to blend in, but to stand out.